Good afternoon, everybody. This is the Tuesday, January 18th, 2022 Finance Committee meeting for the town of Scarborough, Maine. I call this meeting to order. And quickly glancing, it looks like Councillor Seither, Councillor Anderson, and Councillor Paul Johnson are all here. Next is the approval of the minutes from the December 2021 meeting.
So moved.
Second. Any discussion? Nope. All those in favor? Okay, before we get started, just real quick, we don't have any action items today. We have several items for conversation. My guess is the first item will take up the lion's share of our time, and the other ones I think are more informational. So we're going to go right into item 4A, which is downtown TIF. It's the town capture rate amended and development program. I will lead off my perspective of what brought us here, and then hopefully Tom will articulate it further for me. But for those at home, for us, for the full council, I believe this Wednesday, Tom, correct, for the Higas Parkway TIF?
Yes.
So the background to this is this Wednesday, or last time we met, we talked about the Higas Parkway TIF, and the question on the table was, do we extend that TIF? And I think unanimously we decided that made a lot of sense. We could capture that money and save some money and also help pay ourselves back for the debt on the essentially the sewer project, and also some cost towards SEDCO. It looks like I talked to Tom on a one-on-one basis and Councillor Clucci a couple times. I think we might have a more refined plan for that Higas Parkway TIF, so I'll let Tom flesh that out a little bit more today, because it's important to also loop in our conversation today. So the conversation today is essentially right now in our downtown TIF district, we have a capture rate of 3%. So we're essentially sheltering 3% of the increased assessed value in the entire downtown district. As a reminder, the downtown district essentially includes the Downs, Oak Hill, and everywhere in between. So it's not just the Downs that we're discussing. We do also have the 40% CEA that is specific just to the Crossroads district, which we refer to as the Downs. So there are two areas within the area, so to speak. So the question before us, and one thing we need to discuss is, do we want to increase that 3% capture rate to essentially reap the rewards of capturing that? Some of our previous discussions that we have had have said that we would be willing to do that. I think on its face, it makes absolutely perfect financial sense, but I think all of us understandably want to be able to do it in a very easy manner and not necessarily spend exhaustive amount of time on educating, and see if maybe there's a half step we can take. Let's possibly not do 100% capture rate. Let's do a capture rate that everybody's comfortable with, and maybe we could live through that for a year or two, a budget cycle or two, and see how that played out for everybody's understanding, and then maybe revisit it in a year or two and perhaps increase it more. I think that's the directionally, what I think has been what I've been hearing. So with that, Tom, I'll let you pretty much flush out what I just said, but that's the overview.
That's a great intro. And the Finance Committee will recall, I think Karen did line share of the work, but we all collaborated. Our thought process was to kind of back into what is a logical additional capture rate to fund kind of municipal projects using TIF revenues from the downtown TIF. And so the first order of business was really to scour the existing budget. What are we already spending money on? And which of those are actually allowable currently under the statute? So that was an exercise that we put together and shared with you a couple of months back. And it's coming back to you in a bit of a more refined form, So I'd characterize that as kind of the low-hanging fruit. I don't see any reason. That's really dollar for dollar savings. That's money that we do not have to raise through general taxation, and it should provide assistance for the tax rate, downward pressure. The other part of the exercise really has picked up steam in the last 3 or 4 weeks, really on the heels of the community survey and the overwhelming support for a community center pool, whatever you want to call it. We see an opportunity for at least a conversation as we look at potentially expanding our allowable uses and amending our development program to do so. Do we also at the same time kind of include that as an option of finance, whether we choose to use it? And I should preface all of this by saying, just because we receive approval from DCD doesn't mean we need to use any of it or all of it. It's just having that available to us. And that's a really important thing to think about. I think having the state approval in hand just gives us local options to exercise when and if we wish, and at what level we wish. So what we've prepared for you today is kind of two sides of the equation. And really there's kind of, in my mind, two questions. One is, what do we want to increase the capture rate and by how much? And secondarily, very closely related, is do we wish to expand the eligible uses? That's kind of the so-called development program. And so what we've put together is basically the table in the development program that would be submitted to DECD. And what is up on the screen right here, the highlighted language is what I referred to, is just because the items are here doesn't mean we have to use all of it or any of it for these projects. But the table itself is kind of broken into three pieces. What's in black text is what exists already and approved by the state. What's in red is generally either refinements on that, by including the town engineer, for instance, in number one, or it really is the category of things we're already spending money on in the budget. And so I would call the red more that low-hanging fruit. And then the blue, which is the last two items, are things that are kind of new. One is some additional economic development support that's kind of started to materialize, driven by Cumberland County. And the last one is what I referred to earlier, whether or not we wish to explore this so-called tier 4 allowances. The second sheet is really for internal purposes. I just wanted to make sure you appreciated. I shouldn't gloss over this. We've tried to capture the assumptions we've made, and we hope and expect there'll be good conversation around these assumptions, whether they're accurate and appropriate. As is my nature, they're generally fairly conservative, and I think there's probably some room for discussion. We do have legal counsel to help guide some of that discussion. And that's, if you could scroll one more page, this is just for kind of internal use. The top is that 4 tiers. This is directly out of statute, just for kind of guidance purposes. And then the table at the bottom is just our kind of internal check, so you can see where we think these different cost categories fall in terms of which tier in the statute, and whether or not they're currently in the program. So that's really kind of just for internal purposes. So that's the expense side of the equation. It begs the question, how much, what's the revenue potential? How much can we expect that this is going to be coming our way should we choose to maximize? And the assessor, Nick Cloutier, has put together some of that modeling. It gets very difficult when you try to project out over the length of the TIF, frankly. And so what you see before you right now is just based on FY22 data with a fair degree of, high degree of accuracy, I'll say. Again, a discussion point might be whether or not we need additional analysis here to give you confidence that there'll be sufficient funds to support whatever you're thinking about. Again, just because we get the development program modified or amended to include additional items, the money doesn't exist. We don't have to spend. We won't spend it, obviously. So the two are related, but they I think you could also consider them separately, if you will. It does appear based on performance, particularly from the Downs part of this downtown TIF, because that is the kind of the economic engine so far in year 3, that they've been exponentially increasing in value, and their projections are for kind of a doubling of value going forward. It remains to be seen whether they can keep that sort of pace, but I think I'm confident that we'll continue to see considerable value created within these 1,000 acres. So I'll stop there. We do have Shauna Cook-Mueller here with us today, who was our legal counsel, but also kind of a statewide expert when it comes to TIF. I've asked her to be prepared to speak to some of the more recent changes to the TIF statute, which I think provide some at least interesting discussion points, if not pretty significant opportunities for us.
Tom, I just want to add just a clarification. The cost estimate that's in this table, that's over the life of the TIF. So that's not, just want to make sure everybody knows that.
That's per year.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's some challenges when we try to aggregate those costs over time. Again, the assumptions give you a hint as to how we've done that. And Shauna can speak to this, but I don't think DECD will scrutinize over those numbers necessarily, but we are trying to be as accurate as we can, given the exercise. So I'll stop there, and I think there's a lot of discussion points within this.
Shauna, did you have anything to add before we kind of kick around some questions to you, or do you want us to take over? It's up to you.
The only thing I'll add, and it's just for now, on the point that Tom was making about the cost estimates, DECD wants to make sure that the public gets to see what we expect will be the cost of these projects in the future. And so we do want to make them as accurate as we can be, but recognizing that they're going to be years in the future. If we're way, way, way off, then we can kind of deal with it at the time. But they don't have to be exact at this point. But I'll be here for questions as you continue to discuss.
Thank you. Before we kind of jump into just a compliment to the staff, I think that there's the results of this without Tom and I kind of going back and forth, I think is really reflective of the stuff that we've asked in the past. So this is nice to get. Nick, thank you for the hypotheticals. Those are all things that, we used to go back and forth on. So I'm glad that we have them up front, and I think they certainly helped me understand it. So anybody have any questions for Shauna or Tom? John?
So one question I have that I think, I spoke with Councilor Clucci briefly over the phone, and he had mentioned that there might be changes in the state statute that allow community recreation centers to potentially qualify. Because I remember before, Shauna, when you came, that was something that I think was clearly stated as something that didn't qualify, but perhaps things have changed since then. So I'm just hoping you or somebody can talk a little bit to what changed since our last conversation about the community center specifically.
Yeah, I'm not sure if the recent changes to statute are what he was referring to. Since we've chatted last, Shauna, at our request, has talked to the appropriate officials at DECD to explore this further. And I think I'll stop there and let her perhaps explain what she's learned.
Sure, happy to do that. So what we talked about previously is that there is a little used option in the statute for TIF revenues to support the costs associated with developing or constructing and improving facilities that are leased by the town. And what I wanted to explore a little further is in the town of Scarborough, to the extent the town leases a facility for a community center, I know there's sort of various uses being contemplated there. Would that qualify, particularly because there is a subsection talking about unauthorized project costs, and it actually calls out pools. But we did talk about this, and because it's explicitly authorized, the DECD TIF director doesn't feel concerned about this. What she asked is that we really are clear in the language about what the structure is that we intend to use in our amendment document. But to the extent the town leases the building itself for that purpose, then constructing that building could be paid for with TIF revenues. So I think that's essentially where we are on that particular item, but I'm happy to talk further if you have more questions.
Maybe just a follow-up to that, because you keep talking about leasing. So does this mean that whatever the structure is, we would be leasing it, or would we own it? And could the TIF funds be used for it?
No, the facility itself, the building itself, would need to be owned by another entity, a private entity that would lease it to the town.
Okay. So I just know that the 33 that's in here, I'm assuming came from the downtown committee, right? Was that?
I reduced it slightly. I think the number was about $27 million capital cost plus interest. I reduced this carrying a $25 million project plus interest.
Okay.
Again, they're placeholders. And it may be that we aren't able to come up with a structure, legal and financial, that works for us. But again, just getting authorized here is an important part of the prerequisite.
I guess just looking at the downtown committee's report, and I know it's kind of we don't know exactly what the community center would be just yet, but their report had it much higher when we leased. And so are we assuming that it's going to be a smaller space? Like, I'm just trying to understand what we're putting forward in this recommendation, to Shauna's point of trying to make sure if and when this goes forward, we're very explicit in terms of what it is and what it isn't.
Yeah, for my part, part of the community center process, I think I won't speak for everyone, but I was left with the feeling that that exercise was very productive and helpful because it really kind of fleshed everything out. But we were left with a project or a building and much larger than at least I envisioned at the outset.
Mhm.
What I've heard since then, more recently in council discussions, is that we're talking about a community pool, space for childcare and adult care, and some kind of, programming in the middle. So I'm thinking we can probably do that in a lesser, smaller building than was envisioned through the community center process. It may not be the case in the end.
But again, if we needed to change the estimate, because as we go through the process, we learn it might be more, we would just have to
Correct.
go back to DECD to revisit the number. Is that correct?
Yeah, Shauna, when is that an issue? I mean, it probably is an issue when we're approaching the total, but you're right. If we have better estimates, we can always amend this and make them more accurate.
So Shauna, to follow up on, because I think this is really the crux of, so I don't want to, I think I'm relatively confident and say that there's probably zero temperature to lease a facility. I think one of the biggest takeaways we had from the community center process was leasing a facility. I think it's important, for if we are going to move forward with this, that we own the building and own the land and it becomes ours. So I just want to make sure, because we're having I think I don't want this exercise to turn into a conversation of all of a sudden we're right back to square one with a leasing option. So I guess my question to you is, I know I had spoken with Councilor Cucci a little bit. Is there a possibility to, can we lease something for $1 with rights to own it after 27 years and then use the TIF revenue to essentially build the building? I just want to get a little bit more into the nitty gritty, because I think we're going to lose everybody if we talk about it kind of innocuously as if we're going to have a lease, because I don't think anybody supports that. I want to just make sure we get into how we can be creative.
Thank you for that question. And yes, when I spoke to DECD, I asked those particulars because I knew that that was going to be the sort of policy goal of the town, is to arrange for this lease to potentially be very low cost on an annual basis, perhaps even nominal, and that there be a provision whereby the town could retain the ownership of the facility at the end of the term during which TIF revenues are applied to the construction costs. So the construction costs can be paid for with TIF revenues so long as the town is actually leasing the facility. After that point, there is no requirement for the town to continue to lease it only and to not own it. So in my preliminary, and I should be clear, DECD doesn't say, this is good to go. You can take this to the bank. They do these preliminary reviews for us all the time, and we can do a second round of that when we have a actual application and get a little even greater comfort. But in her review in our prior conversations, she doesn't feel overly concerned about this. What she did ask is that if we have some ideas about those terms, and I think we do, that we put that right into the agreement. We do expect that the lease agreement may be at a very low cost. And we do expect that the lease agreement may have a term that allows the municipality to own it after a certain period of time. But the TIF revenues will only be authorized project costs for so long as that lease is in force. And, I think another part of the explanation that we will provide and that DECD will appreciate having is that to the extent this is a private entity that is associated with the developers at the Downs, this is a facility that will benefit their development. And so it is in their interest, perhaps, to offer this type of low-cost lease to the town and to have this type of use there. And so it is, in fact, a furthering of the economic development goals of the TIF statute to authorize this. So that's a little bit more detail into the conversation I had with Tina Mullins at DECD. And to the extent the Finance Committee wants to proceed with this and bring it to the council, what we would do is identify some of those details in a narrative form for the amendment application, and then leaving some room, because we can't put a cost estimate in for something we don't know exactly the scope of. So it's not going to be perfect and detail at this point, but we need to set in motion an authorization for the town to move forward. And that's what this will be able to accomplish.
And one other quick thing, if we brought this to we would bring this to the voters, lease or not. This isn't, this is not a way to get a lease and spend money without voter approval. But if we brought this to the voters, are we running the risk of, let's just for argument's sake, we say we have a $1 a year lease on this facility for 20 years. And then we go and we spend, we improve the facility by building it with TIF revenue. Are we going to run into any issues with getting a tax exempt bond financing because it's on private property and not town owned property when we go out to bond this? And if
That
we
is
do-
not, yep, go
Go
ahead.
ahead. Well, just is that a pretty serious differential there? Because if there is, that's obviously something that needs to be explored.
Yeah, I haven't done the analysis on that particular question yet. So we can certainly do that. It does raise a tax issue that the facility will be owned by somebody else. The use of the facility under a long-term lease may allow us still to access the tax exempt bond market. So I would need to spend some time to research that and confirm which way we would go. To some extent, it might depend upon what the eventual structure is and the negotiation of this lease. But I think there's potential for us to continue to stay in the tax exempt bond market. But we could certainly identify that risk and then also quantify what we think it might cost if we had to go to the taxable market.
Okay, one more question, then Ms. Seiler's going to take over. My last question is another possible revenue. I'm just concerned with the word lease. I think it's going to make people uncomfortable. I think there's a big education hurdle there. So I'm just trying to tease out all the information here. Is there another scenario where we could cover, let's say, 2/3 of the facility because it's childcare, senior care, community service program? And then, is there another scenario where we own the land, we own the building, we bond it like everything else, and we can finance 2/3 of it because only 1/3 of that is the pool, and that's explicitly not an allowable use. But we can take care of 2/3 of this because we could argue that it falls under one of the 4 tiers. Is that a possibility?
Yes. So as you may be aware, there is a specific project cost under the statute for construction and financing costs associated with quality childcare facilities and adult care facilities. And so, and in addition, there's some operating costs that can be covered there too, although I'm not sure that that's going to be as helpful. But I think there is a proportional cost of the facility to the extent those are going to be uses, and those are definitively going to be uses made of a proportion of the facility that we could use TIF revenues to cover. So, it's not it's not as advantageous a financial situation as applying all TIF revenues to the entire cost, but it certainly would help. And I'm not sure if Tom could even speak to yet what that kind of proportional share would be. But we could probably do a little more research and let you know that.
I think one of the challenges off the top of my head for childcare is that the model we have now, we charge fees that cover the costs associated with running that program. And so I don't know, we'd be essentially double dipping. We'd be trying to cover fees that we're already covering with user fees.
But
Covering
we
costs.
have a potential $25 million facility.
Yeah.
That 15 million of that could be, the cost of that could be for childcare and senior programming.
Perhaps, yeah. So I think there are some other ways to slice this. Sean, it also occurs to me, our other option, if we were to pursue this, potentially we could house this on the municipal campus here. Again, the campus is within the downtown district. Presumably, it'd be a different legal structure, but we could find some other partner to to partner with to take advantage similarly. So I think the reason this is in front of us right now is that we're actively in discussions with the Downs. It remains to be seen whether this materializes as part of those discussions. It's started as part of it, but whether it continues. So it's really just preserving an option as we go forward.
Councilor Seiler?
So
Thank you, Shauna.
Thank you. I have a question that's kind of, it's going to be fundamental to me explaining this to other people, and I think for the full council understanding. As we consider amending our application and including these options for tax sheltering, how does this come before us again? So in terms of us deciding, yes, we're gonna spend this percentage of our tax shelter on application question 1, 2, 7, and 9, would that be something that you brought to us as a recommendation, Tom, to
Mhm.
the finance committee, and then we could talk about like, okay, this is the actual amount of money we had. So to me, having these options that as long as legal has advised us that these options, are gonna pass and the DECD is comfortable with us putting these things in here, I understand like getting into the nitty gritty and asking all these questions specifically about the community center, because that has been such a topic of conversation for us. But, it's important for the council and for the public to know, like, we are so far from the nitty gritty discussion of how we're going to spend any of this
Right.
tax sheltered money, that really what now the discussion we're having now is leaving our options open. What are our
Right.
options, and how do we make our application as flexible?
Yeah, practically speaking, there'd be two things that happen. One, if you determine the capture rate, we will, per the statute and the directive from DCD, create a development fund. And we simply direct that percentage of those new taxes on the new value to that fund. In terms of how we use them, you'll get direct line of sight every year through the budget process.
Mhm.
So essentially, there'll be TIF revenues that come in to support different operational costs in our budget. Right now, most of those costs are being supported through general taxation. This will just be a different revenue stream, if you will. So there'll be direct line of sight on the expense side annually through the budget process.
Perfect. Thank you for making that clear and making sure that I'm, in the right
The
place.
other part of, and why this conversation is so apropos right now, I think, is just this downtown development TIF is really starting to pick up steam. So we're entering year 4. As I said, the value is starting to kind of double, and I don't think that's sustainable. But what that means is that we're not accustomed to a big flow of cash into the general fund. And so the sooner we make this switch, it will be painless, if you will. I think it was a total of $60,000 or so, not even that in the given year. That's the total amount in the development fund so far. So the sooner we do this, the better. And the sooner you do it, the sooner you take advantage of the shelter benefit.
Mhm.
And I guess the final piece I just want to say, the shelter benefit, to the extent that we're covering costs already in our budget, those are dollar for dollar savings. The shelter benefit accrues on top of that. And that's essentially 58 cents on the dollar, if you will. And the other thing in terms of the future, we don't know what that holds. If we, for whatever reason, come out of minimal receiver status, all of a sudden the equation changes and we may well want to dial this back. So there's all sorts of reasons to check in often. I'm sorry to.
I have
Sorry.
a couple of ideas and maybe a question based on how Paul opened up the conversation. So first, thank you, Paul, for asking that question about the leasing and stuff to Sean. I think that's really important. So I'm glad you asked it, because it definitely opened my eyes a lot more too in terms of the opportunity. And I agree with what Councilor Scyther just asked about, like, this list does not necessarily mean we're going to spend money to this. It's kind of giving us the opportunity to consider what we may apply the funds to in the future. With that being said, as the town was putting this list together, I'm just curious, did you think about, and is it even a valid use to consider something about the schools? If the school was to expand specifically in the downtown district somewhere, would that be a qualified use under, I think it might be like under one of them that's more about the impacts of the economic development and how that might lead to needing more schools?
I've not explored that. It may qualify under the same tier 4 discussion we're having with the community pool, potentially. We do have an item in here related to a debt for the new public safety building.
Mhm.
And so there may be something analogous there. That's a point I do want to get some further feedback on based on
Mhm.
what Shauna advises and what percentage we're applying.
Yeah.
So there may be some opportunities there. I've not fully explored them, no.
It seems much more explicit that it calls out public safety. So that seems much more clear, but like the schools, again, I would just be curious, especially since we may pursue
Mhm.
a school expansion somewhere in the area with that same tier 4 in mind. Again, would we want to use TIP revenues potentially, or at least have it on the list so that we can have that conversation if we need to down the road? And then the other piece that I think might also qualify that I've just been curious about is transit in the area. And like, is there certain type of shuttle services or things we can do that could bring people into the downtown to the community center that may not like live specifically in the Downs. And so to me, that feels like something we might want to explore and potentially add to in terms of, not maybe it doesn't come to fruition, but it's just something I think we really want to make sure that it really is connected to the community, and having some sort of better public transit or something that the town manages potentially down the road to ensure people around the area can get to the downtown or anything could be of benefit to the community.
And some of the more recent law changes have to do with affordable housing that I must admit I'm not fully aware of, and I suspect there's probably further opportunity there that we've not captured here. I guess personally, I would rather be very clear and transparent. I don't want to get too cute for our own good here, and really be focused. I fear that if we load this up too much, it might just be, the weight of it is too much for DCD. So I guess I'm just suggesting that we be really clear and specific what we want. I know it's tempting to kind of throw in the kitchen sink, and in some
I
respects
got more,
we
but
have.
I'm holding back. No, just kidding.
No,
Well,
I say-
actually, Shauna, can you actually respond to that? I mean, I would have the same hunch, but is Tom's hunch right or not? Can we throw the whole kitchen sink in there? It doesn't even matter. I mean, that's an important question.
Well, so, as you were talking and suggesting this idea about schools, it just brings back to me my 15 years of practice. Every time I bring up public education, it's a big fat no at DECD. I mean, they do have worker training programs as an authorized project cost. And so I have often interacted with DECD about where the line is, and, some public education offerings kind of are pretty close to job training programs. And so we've had that conversation over the years. What I've not ever asked is, could a municipality lease a school building and therefore use TIF revenues to construct such building? And so I'm not sure where that goes. I do think what is beneficial in the interactions I've had with DECD on this topic thus far is that we have had conversations right at the town level about a community center. There is more detail that I can provide to DECD about the potential here. And that gave her greater comfort, because they need to rely on a set of facts for their authorization under that provision. So I do hesitate to kind of blow it out a little bit farther and include schools. But I'm not saying no right off the bat. In response to the question about transit, there are kind of two levels of transit projects that you can include in a development program. One is if you're not in a transit district, which we are not currently, it's a downtown TIF district only. You can have capital costs of newer expanded transit services paid for with TIF revenues. If you create a district as a transit-oriented TIF district under the statute, which requires some additional work to be done, there is an authorization for certain operating costs rather, of newer expanded transit service can be paid for. And that was a nod to the idea that there is a fair bit of grant money out there available for capital costs of transit, but it's the operating costs that make it hard for municipalities to expand those offerings. So just a couple of things. If you want to talk further about transit-oriented districts, we could do that too.
Just one final point to your question, John. Shauna, based on everything I've heard from you and your conversations with DECD, the real touch point for the statute is really in support of economic development. And so why I think there's a very, very clear nexus of a community pool and center, particularly at the Downs, because it in fact is a catalyst to help spur and spawn other economic development. I think it's a little tougher argument on the school side and other facilities potentially. And keep in mind, to the extent that we can articulate a very clear case and point to the provision in the statute as to why this is allowed, it makes our case that much easier. And when in doubt, DCD has at their disposal probably an assistant attorney general that will help them navigate the law. And one of my fears of Tier 4 is that no one has ever used it yet. And so they're going to be appropriately cautious. But again, to the extent that we can articulate and point to the statute and provide, clear transparency into what we're doing and why we're doing it, I like our chances better than trying to really force a number of conversations upon them.
I was just gonna say, and for some transit related improvements, I assume that we could do that under item 1, which is already in there, which transit would be part of traffic related improvements. But Sean, I'm not sure if that's clear. That's what I was assuming. We'd have some flexibility with respect to what's already in there.
Perhaps.
But it may make sense to be more explicit, which is what I think I've done in some of the other ones. So if we need to add some clarity, we should.
Maybe we could add the word
do that.
transit to that language in 1.
I'm just checking the statutory citation to see if it tracks with where transit is called out in the statute.
And it is called out in the downtown development plan. Transit is talked about.
Can I throw one more item in the kitchen sink? Just for consideration and discussion.
Is this a double sink?
It's a giant farm.
Big farm.
Yeah.
One of those big deep farm.
Really deep. You have to like bend in to get, so the library expansion, because I think in the past, some of those funds were covered under a development TIF for the current library. And so I'm just curious, do we want to include that again, just as another example where potentially, again, interest could be covered for.
I think you're referring back to 20 plus years ago when that was either a gray area or allowed. I think they've since slammed that door shut, and there are certain unauthorized uses, and I see legal counsel nodding her head.
Okay.
Yeah,
right, well,
that's true.
Good try. I mean, you did your part.
It's worth noting that Scarborough probably, I don't know if Tina Mullen knows the long history, but this town hall was built in part using the town center TIF. And
Then they changed the law.
urban legend is this was the last one that they allowed and they slammed that door shut. So
Urban legend is you built this town hall yourself, Tom.
happened long before I came.
I was gonna say before you came, yeah.
With these two hands.
My question for discussion from what Paul brought up at the beginning, and Paul, correct me if I misunderstood what you said, but it sounded like you were suggesting we start small and then add more, but it feels like while the value is low, would it make more sense to start high and then come down if things change?
Can we, yes, can we, so I was just about to transition the meeting to us just discussing that exact point. So can we
Okay.
just wait? Because I think we're close to us just kicking that around because
Okay.
that's what I want the conclusion of this to be.
Mhm.
I have 2 more questions and then we're
Okay.
gonna start with that.
Yep.
But yeah, totally 100% agree with the question. Shauna, true or false statement? You ready?
Yes.
The higher the capture rate, does it increase our probability of staying out of minimum receivership?
I
As we
don't
in-
think it's related. I don't think your capture.
So if we
It's-
increase our capture rate, that means that much increased excess value will not go into the equation of the school funding. Is that correct? So I guess I'm thinking logically, if I go capture 100% of this TIF district, that $400 million of increased assessed value doesn't exist according to the state education formula. Is that a true statement?
I don't know the answer to that. I think I need to look. There's a fair bit that goes into your minimum receiver status. It's not a simple linear thing. And also the education cost, the subsidy calculation, it uses the last 3 years average of the state valuation, which muddies the water a little bit too. But let me, I can give some thought to that. Tom, you may have some ideas about it himself, having paid attention to minimum receiver status as well, but I don't want to go too far out on a limb here.
do you guys want to go on a limb? Because I thought you were nodding your
I-
head,
I
or,
just
or now that
mentioned-
Shauna has said she doesn't know, nobody dares to touch it.
Right. I was gonna go for, yes, it does it.
Now that the legal person said, I
Yeah.
don't know, nobody's gonna go out there.
I'll defer to Shauna, but the point I can make with more certainty is when you capture increased revenue, your state valuation is lower than it would have been had you not captured that. And a lower state valuation is part of the equation.
That's what I was, okay.
Yes.
So, and I'll just add that, to Shauna's point about the calculation being pretty complex,
Yeah.
how they, land at Scarborough being minimal receivers. Right now is contingent on current administration's commitment to pay 51% of district's special education costs.
Yeah.
So if that changes, we have absolutely no reason to think that we don't drop
Sure.
right back down below that
That's
line
fair.
again.
Yeah,
Like that.
I guess my
There's a
gut
lot of
is,
sides to that equation.
yeah, my quick reaction would be that there's so many external factors that affect that, that I don't think this would be a final determinant. Having said that, the state equalized value does play a role in that calculation. So it would stand to reason. I don't think it would harm you. It could only help you.
Yeah, and
I
the
don't know
question was,
that it
does it
will
increase
assure
the
anything.
probability? I mean,
Yeah.
I know that's not the sole, right?
There's no
But
assurance that it will keep you there.
Right. but it is about essentially student value per student when it comes down to it. I mean, it's complicated and messy, and you're right. If a new batch gets, new legislators decide and a governor decide to kick that down, none of this matters, right? The 51%.
Too far below
the Right.
threshold.
Right.
In terms of our valuation and our pupil
Yeah.
costs, so it would have. So in that sense, if it changes overnight, no matter how much we shelter, we're still gonna fall into that minimal receiver category. But to your point, if we can get the valuation up and not have it quote unquote count against us
Right.
in that formula, then I don't see how it could be it couldn't hurt us, I don't think.
And another aspect of that, even if the minimum receiver status were to change, there's still benefits to capturing.
Sure.
Like how much county taxes you pay every year.
Right. It's an 8%
Yeah.
benefit rather than 58.
Yeah.
So
Right.
we're not losing money, but the equation
Yeah,
changes.
sure. Okay, I got a couple quick questions, then I think we're gonna pivot to the actual, let's see if we can make a decision or start thinking about what the decision might be. Nick, what's the current, I know you've said it a million times, what's the current valuation of the Downs approximately?
Oh, I don't think I have that in front of me, but
Is that 130 million?
of the downtown,
Just the downtown, yeah.
the downtown TIF district,
Yeah, well, let's just talk
Or
about
just the Downs area?
The Downs area.
I don't think it's on here. Is,
Oh, I thought, isn't that,
I thought the number 67 million
Okay, that,
comes to mind.
okay.
that's the value right there, isn't it?
yeah, I mean, it was on a different meeting I'm not trying to put you on the spot. This was a different meetings, but you've done it for us. That's,
Sure.
okay.
Yep.
So in the Downs right now, it's, let's say, pushing 100 million. There's a bunch of new things. I'm just trying to get my arms around, because your hypothetical scenario was another 100 million. So I'm just thinking, to boil this in my head, it's kind of doubling the current valuation of what's happening in there right now. That's all. I'm just to give us an idea of. Okay, so with that, I think, so this is what I think we're up against for the committee to talk about is, if we're gonna change this, I think we discussed several months ago or what have you, that we need to get this done probably end of February. So I purposely didn't do an action item today because I didn't want us to feel rushed. But what I would like us to do is maybe get us in a good enough spot where perhaps we meet again, perhaps in 2 weeks, and take February off. I know all of us have either trips or family or what have you, and these types of conversations, when they're a month apart, they almost lose their momentum. So I guess my objective would be, can we get to a spot where we feel decent and would be willing to meet in 2 weeks to actually then make an actual recommendation to the council? So that's what I want to do. And now the discussion is, John, to your point, I agree with you. So now the question is, hey, to me, there's only $70 million of valuation here. To me, you capture 100%. There's no logical argument against capturing 100%. I think what this demonstrates is that we can spend that 100% without a community center, without everything. If you look at the line items in the budget, I think it's pretty clear we can spend that 100% capture next year, the year before. So I 100% agree. My only concern was just educating all 7 of us. I know this topic is, if you're not living it or constantly asking questions, but yeah, I agree. I mean, if I was a 1-person vote, I'd just say, hey, why aren't we capturing 100%? And to your point, once we're not spending all the money, scale it back if we don't have a new shiny object to spend it on, right? And so to me, logically, that makes no sense. So I'll lead the conversation that way. So.
I mean,
You can go.
I agree. Like, I don't know if we need to meet in 2 weeks, because I really think this could be simple of, let's do 100% for now,
Yep.
knowing we can always change it later. I mean, it's all based on the new captured value, which it's going to take many years to get to that ultimate point where we're really bringing in significant dollars,
Right.
like even probably next year, right? We only have 34. How much is in the current TIF fund that we have set aside? It's only like,
I was thinking like 60 and you've authorized 25 for consulting
Yeah.
fees, so.
so even if we did 100%, that's not going to go up significantly, right? Or how much would that go up next year?
Well, you're increasing our capture from 3% to 54%.
Here, we can get a rough idea, right?
There's a table for that.
Yeah, I wasn't sure. I was thinking about that. I was looking at the tables and I wasn't sure which one of
So
those. answered
the
question.
top part is using this fiscal year's data. So if we had captured 100%, we would have had 739 in that account versus 34,000.
And is that net of the downs 40%?
Yes.
It is, correct?
Yeah.
And just to reiterate, that's not the downs, that's the entire shebang. That's Oak Hill.
This is what we get after the downs has gotten there.
Yep.
Okay.
For the entire district.
It's the
That's
whole
higher
district.
And then the lower of the two would be maybe what we could expect to see 2 years from now.
Yep.
Not this coming year, but the year
The
after.
downs keeps.
Say there's 50 million added this year, 50 million added the following year. Those are the kind of numbers we could expect to see 2 fiscal years from now.
So let's ask this question. Tom, next budget cycle, can you spend $739,000 in TIF revenue out of that TIF account from the general budget? Because if the answer to that is yes, to me, we recommend 100% and we just move on. Because we can say very clearly, we're capturing 100% and we're just moving $700,000 in expenses over here.
Is that pending approval of some of these other items on our application too?
Yes,
That's-
in particular, I would say no unless we can increase the amount of the public safety building debt we cover.
And right now, we can increase up to 15% of the total, correct?
50% of the total
Capture.
capture. Yep.
Well-
And for discussion purposes, I included 10% of debt costs here. So I think there's some opportunity for upward movement there. I just wanted to have the committee have a discussion and have Shauna give you guidance. If we can go 100%, all the better, but.
So I have 2 devil's advocate things to say. One, if we capture 100% and we can't spend it, it doesn't go away.
Nope.
It sits in an
Nope.
account and we can spend it again, in future budget cycles. And so to your point, yes, we don't want to pad, the TIF account with this extra money that we're sheltering, but if we're shifting money out of the general fund and away from the taxpayer, to me, having that money in that other account, I'm okay with that. But then my devil's advocate thing to say that would be against sheltering 100% would be if we found ourselves in a scenario, and I don't know what the likelihood of this is, maybe it's 0, that we sheltered this money and we paid things out of the, we shifted this money away from the taxpayers and then the TIF revenues go down. And now that's when it starts to hurt, right? Then we have to go back and we have to look at what we paid for out of our TIF account that now needs to start coming back out of the general fund again. And so that to me is the only place where this is risky. And again, like I fundamentally, I think I do agree with you. I just want to make sure that we kind of cover all sides of this.
Yeah, I hear that concern. I guess I'm bullish on the these 1,000 acres, we've designated, our highest, where I think the highest growth potential is. And so if history suggests anything, this is where the activity is going to occur. So I think that's a very minimal downside risk.
And I think just the piece that gives me the most concern about not doing the 100% is the conversation we were having earlier of what happens if we leave minimal receivership.
Yep.
We're gonna leave 58 cents to the dollar on the table. That's not guaranteed, but if we can at least lock it in while it is hopefully guaranteed,
Yes.
then that's money in the fund that could be used to offset expenses for multiple years, even if we don't have the full amount in the budget this year that we would allocate to it.
I don't know about you, but if financial advisor says I can guarantee you an 8% return on your investment, I'd take that all day long. And so even if our fortunes change from a minimal receiver status, it's still an 8% gain to us.
Yes.
Yeah.
Gain to the
Yeah.
general fund,
Yeah.
because that.
Yeah.
Right,
the
John,
tax
I think
shift
that
goes to
that's the
general
most
fund.
compelling reason, standalone reason to
Mhm.
support 100% is because we know that is a guarantee right now.
Mhm.
So I guess, now I just want to make sure if we increase this to 100%, is it based off, does the clock get reset to today's assessed value, or is it back from the beginning of the TIF district? Because that's in beginning of the TIF district, correct? Or is it today's?
I believe the
It's the
original OAV.
So it's still the origin, so it's still based off the original OAV. It's not based off today. Just want to make sure,
Correct.
because that's a huge difference in money. So it is the 700. I just wanted to make sure we weren't.
But the
700.
shelter benefits start to accrue from the time.
Yeah, absolutely,
the
but it's
change.
based, so even though we're cranking up the capture rate today, it's still off the original OAV. There's not like a separate OAV because we decided to crank it up. Okay, that would have been a big difference. I just want to
Yep.
make sure.
And then to speak to Councilor Seider's comment about, can we bank it? And that's currently what we're doing with the 3%.
Right.
Yes, we
Yep.
would be able to do that.
Shauna, can you give some clarity around the public safety building debt? And
Yes.
what it would be allowable to cover through this downtown TIF district?
Yeah, I think we have some room there. So there are two sections in the statute that authorize the use of TIF revenues on public safety facilities. One has been there for a long time, and it is the provision that requires a connection between the need for that public safety facility and the district improvements. And so that still is there. To the extent we can draw a connection between the development in the district and the need for the public safety facility, whatever chunk we can support meets that standard can be paid for, not subject to any 15% cap. So once we get that number understood, then we look to this tier 3 category that is a more recent addition to the TIF statute, where they authorized any connection to economic development driving the need for a public safety facility in the town, subject to a 15% of that year's tax increment as a cap. So, I think we first work in tier 2 because we've got such a significantly sized district that I presume will create some room. And then, what I haven't done is gone to DECD with these two pieces together. So what I would like to suggest is that we get that tier 2 allotment, and then we add to it a 15% per year under tier 3. I'm not confident about being able to add that second piece to it. I think it depends upon how the numbers shake out, but I think we need to look at that and not necessarily assume that the 15% is really our cap.
The one thing we have going for us is that this new facility is our central station. It's located literally in the geographic center of the district. We can very clearly articulate, we built a building nearly double the size that we had before, in part to accommodate future growth and development, within the central fire district. So I think there are some very direct parallels and straight face arguments we can make to cover at least half the cost, I suspect. Really built in large part to prepare ourselves for what's coming.
Shauna, if I could ask, when you say public safety debt, are you including principal and interest or just principal?
Both.
Both.
I just did a simple straight line $30 million in P and I costs, and 10% of that is just for purposes of getting this up for discussion.
All right, well, okay, just stay with me for 1 second. 'Cause there's one little thing, and I was looking for someone to type this out so we can visualize this. These numbers are not gonna be perfect, but since we started this, we've had, in the entire downtown district, there's been about $100 million of increased assessed value. I'm taking 70 million in the downs and 30 million in Oak Hill and somewhere else, which I think I'm overestimating that, but I'm just throwing that out there. That's $150,000 a year in tax revenue.
Mhm.
So our mill rate's about $15. So it's $150,000 a year in tax revenue. We gave this past year, we gave 40 grand to the downs or 60 grand.
Back in reimbursement for the
Yeah.
CEA.
I don't have that.
Okay, I'm gonna go with 50 grand, make it easy. So there is in the increased assessed value. There is about 100 grand going into the general fund right now that we are spending.
Mhm.
And if you can't cover, if you're saying you're not 100% confident that you can cover, that you can use all of the money, we are creating a small gap in revenue in the general fund if we shift all of the tax revenue from the increased assessed value over to the TIF district. If you can't spend it all, there is a small gap and again, this is some bad back of the napkin math, but I just want to be really clear. And I wish I could find a whiteboard. Hold on, let me look this up.
But that gap is small now, and
I totally agree.
the
I
longer we
totally
wait, the
agree,
bigger
but
that gap is.
But there is if you can't take all of it and spend it all, which I am okay with. That means of the increased assessed value, since this TIF district was created, there will be a small gap in the general fund tax revenue. And I just think we need to be clear about that. Not a big gap.
Are you accounting for the additional revenues from the tax shift?
So if we do the tax shift, are those all savings to the general fund or are they? Because if they
Well,
are, then they
they're-
probably balance
It's
each other
different
out.
forms. It's less money, it's more money in state subsidy, it's less
Okay.
money to the county, but it helps the bottom line.
So then that's probably enough to cover my small gap.
Yeah.
I just.
Now, the question you posed to me, I was looking to very quickly find a way to spend $740,000.
Yeah, right, yeah.
As I look at the allowed uses, I'm not sure if we could.
Yeah.
Particularly if, based on your scenario, we've got $100,000 and only 15,000 of that, because we're limited to 15%, can go to public safety.
Correct, right.
Where were you getting the 100,000 or 150,000? I'm concerned there's an order of magnitude question here, like every 100 million of new value creates 1.5 million in tax revenue.
So, okay, so I said, I thought, I was estimating there's 100 million.
So 100 million of new value captured, for every 100 million new value, there's 1.5 million
Oh, I-
of tax
yeah, I was
dollars.
off by
900,000 could go to the TIF, 600 to the developer.
Yeah.
So it's 900,000 if the million, but we're below that. But
Yeah.
That's why it was 700,000.
Well, no, we're at,
We're,
150
we're at
per million.
76 something. So if it's 100 million, which we're a little under, 900 is not the developer. So either general fund or TIF, and 600,000 is developer. If 100 million was number, it's just an order of magnitude, extra zeros.
$1 million property is $15,000 in tax revenue.
Sure. So, but then 100 of those,
Would be 1.5 million, just like I said. Thank you.
so the right number, just a couple zeros. Yeah.
I appreciate you confirming my numbers there.
That's how we got to that 700,000. It just
That's right, 700, yeah, thank you.
This
Yes.
goes to
yes.
900,000 if it's a million
Yeah.
even.
Look, the concern was the same. I'm not overly concerned with it, to be very clear. I don't think I think it's actually a non-issue, but one of the things of the easiest path forward is just to say, if we do this 100% capture rate, that we can essentially spend it today. That's all. And if we can't, that means we're sheltering some and we're saving some, as we should be,
Mhm.
and reaping a tax benefit as we should be.
Mhm.
So based on that scenario, I think it's now $200,000 a year could go, at least, given that example, toward public safety.
So I just didn't want come budget time that we actually have a smaller, an actual revenue gap in the general, just in the general fund. Because that will happen if we.
You'll see that in the first year, the transition year. And
Yeah.
that's the point I've been trying to make is the sooner we do that, the pain is less.
Oh, totally
Once
agree.
you make that
Yes.
switch, you don't see it year over year. It's already baked in.
Yeah, if we do this in 5 years, then it's a conversation. that's
Very
super-
painful.
Totally.
I
It's
think
a $1 million switch overnight.
Yeah.
Right.
I think it's also worth considering, if we're looking at it from a 1-year perspective, perhaps there will be some pain that first year potentially.
Yeah.
But small, but then whatever we have set aside then applies to the next year to
Absolutely.
address
Yes, totally.
the following
Yeah,
year. So it's a multi-year benefit,
Yes.
though there might be some single year issue. So now I am wondering, like, because I'm not fully, I am tracking what you're saying in terms of what you're putting forward in terms of the numbers, but now I feel like, do we want to see that? Do we want to see more explicitly in order to break even for next year in the general fund?
Yeah.
What would the percentage be that we would have to set aside? Is it 60%, 80%, 90, like? Again, I feel
And
confident we should
do you
still
want
do
us to-
100%, but
Do you want us to factor in the shelter benefit in that analysis too?
yeah.
And just a note on the shelter benefit, you need to just keep in mind that the benefits of capturing this year will not accrue to the town's subsidies and county tax obligations for a couple of years. Because the state valuation that's used today in the formulas is based on a couple of years ago.
So which is even more of a reason to do it now.
Yeah.
Yeah, so all of the, I understand why you'd want all this analysis. I'm not sure in the end whether it's gonna be of much value. I think there's a intuition here of sorts, and I frankly comfort if a council at any time could choose to modify this any way they wished if it's not working out.
I don't think it's I don't think this is hard to model this, what you're saying. I mean, I think you can,
I guess I'm looking to staff.
Another piece of information, if you don't mind going back to
Yeah,
this.
perfect. Yes. Yeah, bring us back to reality. I shouldn't
Sure.
even, yeah.
Just for your consideration on this, you'll notice the difference between if capturing 50% and if capturing 100 is minimal compared to the other increases from 3 to 10 and 20. It's because the Downs CEA, we're already capturing 40. So within the Downs, 100 is only bringing up to 60 basically, because 40 is already going to the Downs. So if you're wavering between, should we capture 50 or 100, they're almost the same. It's not that simple compared to the others. And the administrative ease of 100% is way more appropriate. Not only the ease of administering it, but it's just less issues. And there's not as much difference as you would think between 50 and 100 because 40% of everything in the CEA is already.
So you're
Yeah, I
saying
mean, to
the
keep this in perspective, we're sheltering 3% in the biggest growth engine in this town, we're sheltering 3%, which is absurd. Yes.
So Nick, I just want to
I
make
was
sure
gonna
I understand the point you're making. So if you're looking at the 3% to 10, you're going from 34 to 114, and then 10 to 20, it's another 100,000. But that gap from 50 to 100 is
Minimal. It's only 10% increase almost because of the
Yeah.
Downs is already getting 40% of growth in that district. So if you're considering 50, 100 is a better idea. If it's 10%, then it's a different conversation.
So I'm still comfortable moving forward now with this still being 100% and bringing that to the council. I would say having some of that analysis in the packet, because I think the question
Yep.
will come up of what is the first year impact potentially? And again, it's all going to be kind of assumptions, right? It's not going to be 100% accurate because we won't know all the answers. But I could see how some counselors and even the public would want to understand that. So
Mhm.
I'm comfortable still pushing this forward as a finance committee recommendation for 100%, assuming we have some of that information in the packet when we go to the broader council.
would,
Can I refine that? Because we just had a contract zone withdraw that was supposed to be on February 2nd. Should we take that workshop time and bring this to the whole council on February 2nd?
That wasn't a workshop. That was going to be on the regular agenda.
Oh, we weren't even gonna
No,
work.
we already have workshop.
Oh, shoot.
for another
Okay,
matter.
sorry.
I'd like to go back to your initial suggestion, which is allow us some time to do this analysis, come back to you in a couple of weeks, whenever it's convenient. We can do a quick check-in. I really want to make sure you guys are, rock solid on your understanding, because this is going to be a heavy lift, I think, with your council colleagues. So I'd really like to make sure that you three are solid on your recommendation, and that we have the materials ultimately for council that you think are going to be most persuasive in terms of making this argument and making it easy. So I hate to ask for another meeting, but I think it'd be helpful.
I'm
We're gonna have one shot at this, and I shouldn't say that, but our first shot is our best shot, and I'd love to make sure that we have all of our ducks in a row.
Yeah, I mean, my big thing is I just don't want people to feel like they got surprised come budget time. That's my, and that's my, and I agree, year one impact. My hunch is year one impact, it might even be net positive. So perhaps I shouldn't have phrased it the way I did, because but I do think that it's just at least, again, the whole reason why, it goes back to why I was suggesting, or I thought I was suggesting lower, was to let people live it. So if we can live it before we decide it, I think that will just help. So.
Can I just ask a question to clarify that, what the analysis is that is being requested? I think the request is that essentially the difference between this year's capture of 34,000 and what could be next year at 100% is, I think, 739,000. That difference is what would have gone to the general fund if you didn't do any amendment.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, and I
so
don't-
you need,
I'm sorry.
right? Is that right?
Yeah,
Right
I
around
think-
$700,000 is what we need to make sure we can, kind of figure out if in next year's budget, we could shift to the TIF.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, and then so that's the expense side of the equation. And then in the general fund, there's a loss of revenue there. So I just want to make sure that that loss of revenue doesn't have upward pressure on the tax rate for that year. And if it does, let's just know what it is. It might be nominal or what have you.
But there's also, right, the sheltering benefit. we're
Correct.
Getting
And
for
that-
for 58 cents that we would be missing out on. So it's
Correct.
kind of like,
I think it's going to be fine.
yeah.
But Shauna, I'm only looking, and I think people agree, we don't need tier, I just need 100%. I don't need 70%, 50%. We're already asking you guys to do a lot. I think we all agree 100% makes the most sense and we support it. So let's just model 100% to give everybody an idea of where we are. And frankly, it might be best to do what Nick did and just do last year's, the current budget we're under, because I think those are numbers people are familiar with, but.
And this form, do you
Like,
think that's?
what would Tom's budget presentation have looked like this year if we did it this year? I think that's just good context for everybody to understand.
Yeah, we can model that easy.
Yeah, so let's do it that way. Are you cool with that, John? April, is that good? Okay, I just think that they're numbers people are comfortable with. Nick's already framed it in that sense. Let's keep the same frame.
Is one of the assumptions that the allowable uses of the monies
Yeah.
have expanded?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Has to be.
Yeah, we're gonna move forward everything, pretend we did it last year. What's it look like? And maybe we find out the tax rate would have even been lower. Right? So let's just figure that out.
And then does it make conceptual sense for this, as part of this discussion that then recommendation goes to council, is that we expand the allowable uses as well?
Absolutely. Yep.
I'll do some additional work in the public safety building to increase the amount based on that 15% limitation.
Can I just, I know we're getting tired of this, but for something I learned over the week, only the public safety, of what we capture, we can only spend 15% of what we capture on the public safety building. So when we're looking at that $750,000, right, that's approximately 100,000 so to Tom's
So
point.
That 15% grows over time.
Yeah, huge,
As our capture.
big overtime, yeah. Okay,
Okay, so just to be clear, we landed on meeting again in 2 weeks before we bring this to the full council.
yes,
give
with one
staff some time.
modeling, because we pretty much know what we want to do, but we want to make sure.
Great.
Sounds good.
Do we think we can get this through council in one session? That's all that's required through the statute?
Why don't we talk about that when we meet again?
Okay.
Just to keep in mind, the annual deadline for filing applications is March 1. We can get an extension to March 31st. So I'm not worried about that. We're also an amendment. So, I mean, arguably that timeline doesn't really apply to us in the same way, but I want us to try to fit within that. So DECD is happy to review.
I guess I'd like it to land on the council agenda, your second meeting in February.
Yeah.
And
totally.
if we can get
That's
through,
fine.
terrific. If not, we need 2 steps. That's fine.
I think it's important because I would think you would want to include it in the budget that you propose, right? So
Right,
it's like,
right.
You want to make sure it's in there, so.
And this exercise we're having him do is essentially preparing
Yeah.
for for what he's in the middle of.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, great. Do we dismiss Shauna now? Is that? Shauna, thank you very much.
Thank you, Shauna.
Thank you. Nice to see everybody,
Yeah,
sort
good
of.
to see you as well.
Bye-bye.
Hey, Karen.
Thanks, Karen.
Thank you, Karen.
Okay, up next, we have a discussion on our debt management, financial and fiscal policy. I believe this comes from our last meeting. We all had homework, is that correct? And our homework was to read the fiscal policy and I forgot.
See if we understood it.
What I included in your packet was just section 1, which relates to debt management, and even that is 9 or 10 pages. Therein is, I think, the genesis of the question or the task at hand. Is there a way to simplify this?
Before we do that, do we have the energy to have this discussion or would we like to discuss this at another meeting? Well, it's been an hour, 15 minutes. The other ones are light lifts. I just want to make sure. And I have to be to work at 6.
Yeah, for this, to me, it's the same thing from the last
Yeah.
conversation, which is there something we want to add into the policy that says, we strive to keep our debt services under 15% of our budget or something like that, that just kind of gives us that metric in our fiscal policy. Because again, I think from the data last time we saw, it was always around 13%. I think just like knowing when it comes to debt management as a council, do we have the appetite to set a policy threshold of where we want to try and maintain our debt as a percentage of our expenditures?
Yes, please.
On page 4, there's the ratios that we're supposed to kind of keep track of. One of them is debt support and service payments as a percentage of the annual budgeted governmental expenditures. So I guess a little definition of what governmental expenditures might be helpful. I kind of did that really quickly, and that's about 11.8% right now.
11.8% of the gross or?
It's the, well, it's 8.31 if I only include principal. If I do principal and interest, it's 11.8.
Mhm.
And I only included the schools operating and the towns operating. So there's, there might be other budgeted numbers, but that's the
Yeah, and I
bulk of what
think
we do.
Councilor Clucci did a 10-year analysis, and I think it ranged between 11 and 13. It was kind of comfortably in that range. The other way to look at it is kind of create a dashboard, kind of a warning signal. If we arrive, if it becomes, above 15%, then that's a flag waves, and we kind of assess where we are. Can we handle it? What are the reasons for it? This section here really talks about this analysis done before we incur additional debt. What impacts will it have?
Yeah.
But it's not really a bright policy guide. It doesn't say what that upper threshold is and what the consequence of that is. Just be aware of this before you accept and issue new debt.
And we could put something like what that percentage is in the budget process so that people can see it on the debt page, for example. That might give an indication that, oh, we're getting up to 16%, we've got an issue, or hey, we're dropping down.
And as I've said in the past, the way we've been able to manage it from a budgetary point of view is to really smooth out the peaks and valleys. We've done that through refunding. We've done that through thoughtful kind of waiting to bond when we had debt opportunities in our debt service, if you will. That more than kind of any other operational expense can really provide that yo-yo effect and affect swing your tax rate up and down. So from my perspective, we've always tried to manage that as tightly as we can because it can really show itself in a higher tax rate. And conversely, when you have opportunities, if you, it looks good to reduce your tax rate, knowing all well you're going to issue 50 million in the next year, you bounce back up. So historically, the councils have wanted to be as predictable and stable with their tax rates as possible, so it doesn't fluctuate up or down.
I mean, what good is this if it doesn't define any of what these ratios should be?
Yeah, I thought that when I read it. I was like, is there a target or?
That might be a discussion because it does say that we're supposed to review this, all of us annually, so that might be a.
Ruth, let me ask you this. What would you do to this fiscal policy? And I want just give it to me as honest as possible.
The only problem with putting in limits lower or upper is that a council could then turn around and override it. So that's one kind of negative, but I don't think there's a problem with putting them in, just so people are aware. Yes, we know we're reaching our limit and we're actually going to do that and go exceed it. So there's a conscious effort to do that. I do like, I like these. I don't know if I like the debt per capita one, but the rest of them I think are, and the last one said something about overlapping debt and stuff, and you know, the chances of Portland Water District or whatever disappearing, Eagle Maine going away are probably pretty slim. So I can't see us really doing that last one, but
So remember, this is the policy of the council. I suppose the council controls when and if you send a matter to the voters, but the voters are the ones that decide on, you know, debt of any consequence. We do have a requirement for the charter to include, you know, a full fiscal note on all those questions. I'm not suggesting that we expand that to include these things, because I think asking the average resident to understand what that means in our whole financial position is just too much to expect. But we do disclose the amount of capital, the amount of principal and plus estimated interest costs. So I think most people, voters, should know that and understand that.
a lot of this is pretty much just boilerplate in my mind, because it just covers us. The only thing is on page 7 at the bottom, it says principal amount greater than 400,000, which is voter approved referendum. So if that changes,
The policy
Charter.
has changed.
Yeah.
that might be something that we either don't put that amount in, or we say it currently is at X, but it could change in the future.
Mhm.
So we don't have to keep amending it just for that,
Mhm.
or maybe it won't change. And then the other page, page 8, and again, this is, we could take it out if you'd like. It talks about the state statutory debt, which we're required by law to follow. But below that is the town of Scarborough's local debt limit, which was approved, which I put together a long time ago, because back in the day, there were some elected officials who were very concerned about the amount of debt that we had outstanding and that limit. So to try and offset that a little bit, because the state is such a high number. I mean, you know, 100 millions of dollars that we could technically borrow and still be within the state's limit.
I
This
think
was
it's-
an effort to try and kind of keep us at put a limit on ourselves. If
Yeah, I think that statutory limit puts us well over $500 million in
Yeah,
debt. So
it's
if you think
huge.
100 million is uncomfortable,
Yeah.
this self-imposed is 8.5%, which is
A little bit
still more than
that.
we are.
Yeah,
yeah.
a little bit more than- yeah, and it's still above what our limits are.
So I guess I defer to the group in terms of like how much time and effort you guys want to put into this. I think of it more as like when it comes to budget, you know, just making sure we have some guideposts to help guide us
Yeah.
when we're thinking about debt and the CIP and what we fund and when we fund. And I don't really get that from this particular fiscal policy as written. And so that's where I think there's probably opportunity to make some revisions, which again are subject to change, to your point. But at least for this council and thinking maybe in the next few years, is there some fiscal metrics we would want to incorporate in there?
And if I may, the last piece is on page 9, it talks about a reserve fund, and it talks about an equipment reserve fund, which we started last year. So those are two pieces. You know, to me, reserve fund, I don't know if that's considered the undesignated fund balance, or if that's a reserve we're supposed to be sticking over here someplace. So even I don't have a clear understanding of that piece. So that would be something that I guess I would Committed fund balance, so it's, I guess that's the,
But the use of reserve funds is really something within the control of council. So think about your annual CIP borrowing. It's under the threshold, not requiring voter approval. We've been averaging $3 to $5 million in annual borrowing pretty consistently to cover school and town costs. If we had reserve funds to offset at least some of those expenses, it will go directly to reducing your debt load. So that's something we've talked about for decades and have just now finally committed to. And I think with ARPA funds, we're going to be able to fund those even more going forward.
I mean, I would just get rid of the whole thing and rewrite it, half a page. Just to bite my tongue the whole time. So I'm probably not the right person to talk to about this.
there was something in here that said CAB in big bold letters, and
Yeah.
I didn't know what that meant.
I mean,
had to
how
look
many
it up.
letters are there in the Greek
I
alphabet?
know. I had to Google it, so, it's probably time for a
Sorry.
review.
Just keep in mind, the other purpose, maybe the largest purpose this serves, it's not very user friendly for us. It's really for the bond rating agencies, for them to see that we have a policy, that we're adhering to our policy. And this does make sense to those analysts.
The voice of reason chimes into my.
There is a point to be served in that regard, but I agree, it's not very user friendly for us.
Can I just make a suggestion?
Yes,
Perhaps
please. Somebody
After this year's budget and the finance committee meeting after that, maybe we spend the time between now and then actually thinking through this a little bit more and coming back then to say, do we want to revisit and change it?
Yeah, I feel like this is a conversation that's hard to build momentum, like in bits and pieces. So, I already don't have Chairman Cloutier's projections, and I would like for that to be part of the conversation, and, language choices and, staff input is also important. So I do feel like probably this isn't the right time to necessarily get into the weeds on this, but I would, if you guys want to set some parameters and tackle this after the budget process, and we set that as a goal for the finance committee for this year, I think that's perfectly good plan.
Yeah, I would just wish it was a little more directional and explicit for us, right? I think that's what we're kind of looking for. Like, I think we all could have got behind, hey, let's not, there's a, we have this stop limit of 14% of our operating budget. So if a big project's coming up, there's a reason to say, hey, we're putting this off. And it's a smart reason too, right? I actually like that it's written, the reserve account's actually written into here to actually make us start actually saving to offset the cost of bonding a fire truck or what have you, right? So those are the types of things that I like about a policy like this. And I think, John, that's what you're trying.
Right, we want to have
100%
something to fall
driving
back
towards.
on, but, when you go through the policy and you say, well, we're not doing that.
Yeah,
well,
right,
we're-
that's
we're-
right.
No council's ever done that, and what are the guidelines around this one? I
Right.
mean,
Yeah.
for our practical use, we can't apply half of this
Right.
policy because
Right.
it's so subjective.
Like in
So-
my 3.5 years, I've never had somebody break out the fiscal policy and say, hey, we should follow this at this moment.
Yeah.
It would be nice if we actually could do that,
Had something that was,
right? And why is
More
the state
digestible.
statute in there? It's already
Yeah.
dictated by state. Get rid of it.
So I think it also just helps us with communicating decisions,
Yeah.
especially around budget
Correct,
time, which I feel
absolutely.
like we don't, like, we hear that conversation about debt, we have too much debt, but if we could respond back to that to say, well, according to our policy, we cap at X, but we're still within that framework. All the things Tom has shared
Mhm.
about, the ebbs and flows and how that works, like, I feel like that's just kind of where I would like to get to on this, and I don't feel like we're there yet.
All right, 100%. I think we're all 100% in alignment. We're gonna live through the budget season. And we're gonna take this up at the other end. Yep. We're dealing with the TIF stuff. Because that's what we're living through right now. So let's keep it that way. All right, discussion item letter C, monthly financial statements.
The link was provided, those are available on the website.
Yep.
Um,
I'm just gonna click on the link so people can
Yep.
see. So if you're watching this and you open up our agenda, which is readily available on the very front page of scarboroughmaine.org, you can click right here. And it will open up the monthly financial statements tab. And And here they are. And you can click this button right here. If you don't want to look at it in the window. And it will give you all 115 pages of glory.
Mhm.
Ruth, do you want to just in 30 seconds or less explain what this is, just in case some people are watching? So,
Sure, this is the, a monthly report that we run in, every month. Actually, it's for the council, but, what it does is it shows what was budgeted for that month. It shows the year-to-date expended, if there's any purchase order encumbrances, balances, that's on the expenditure side. The revenues show the same thing, the estimated revenues, the actual received, and what our percentage collected is. And then the last one, I believe, is what we call the balance sheet, or I call the trial balance, which kind of shows where our cash position is, how many receivables we have outstanding, payables at that point in time.
this is a tremendous amount of detail, and admittedly, I did not click on this, so.
And it's all funds, so it's everything that the town has, I believe.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen, and you've been doing this for like 6 months now. It's relatively new, right?
It's
This
relatively
monthly
new.
form.
Yeah, this year.
And so, and I think we were doing beforehand, we were just doing quarterly reports. Is that correct? And now this is a way more nitty gritty each month.
Right, if folks
Yeah.
want to get into the detail of it, they can do that.
So this is a relatively new initiative. I know Councilor Hamels pushed for this for quite a while.
Mhm.
And this should be at the end of every month, readily available in the same way, so. I don't have anything to add, frankly, because like I said, we had a bigger discussion, but did anybody have anything to add to that? Nope,
you.
okay. Moving on, right under that, we have our quarterly financial statements, which again, you can click right on the agenda. It will bring you to this. You do this little thing right here if you want to see it a little better.
And these are intentionally higher level.
Yep.
It's not line item detail.
And Tom, you want to just explain? I did read this one, but you want to explain this? Yep.
This is the product of, decades of working with past finance committees to try to accommodate their needs. So we don't profess that it's right, and we need your feedback if there's something that's lacking here. But essentially, the format is Ruth prepares this overall kind of narrative, which gives someone a quick little easy read to understand what the drivers are, both positive and negative. And then it goes into really kind of a balance sheet format. Again, past council finance committees really wanted to see that balance sheet format. That's relatively new to us in governmental accounting. We don't typically report our financials in such a way. And then there's some further detail on all of our other funds, special revenue and capital. And then a quick little peek at the educational side, again, totally in aggregate. So that's just a very quick overview of what's in front of you. There are a couple of notable things I think just worth commenting on this quarter, which Ruth really captured well in her narrative. If I could, just from my perspective, the fact that excise and permit revenue is tracking right on budget is really good. Those are really inextricably tied to the economy, in my view. So I think it gives us a pretty good sense of the strength of our local economy that we're tracking on budget. I think in both cases, those revenue estimates were higher than last year. So we continue to be moving in the right direction and stay on target. I don't really see anything that's concerning to me at all. Public works expenditures, there's a seasonal effect. They're, spending money, getting parts in the warehouse, if you will, and then salt and sand. And so it's not surprising me at all to see some increased expenditures. Also overtime occurs this time of year. So really nothing noteworthy mid-year at this point, as far as I'm concerned.
They do use the purchase order system heavily, so, they may have a budget and they say, I've encumbered 100% of it because it's all going to Eagle Maine. And then they allocate that
Yeah.
monthly, so that would show a higher percentage spent. And then library and council too, depending on when the bill gets paid, it could be like right now, it should show 50%, but if we've paid the third quarter at the end of December, it'll show 75%. So it might look high, but we're not going to pay the next one till the end of the year.
So Tom, silly question about public. When you were saying uptick in budget, that's simply because of the season, because we've had a pretty mild winter. So, but you just expect this uptick because it's winter. Is
Yeah.
that- Okay.
Always. They fill the salt and sand shed to the rafters, not knowing what's to come. So you'll see in the second quarter of every year, they're spending that budget right out. And again, this is the time of year we're incurring expense. You say it's not a bad winter, but in many respects, we spend more money and time and materials for these questionable storms that aren't snow. If it was straight snow, it would be much easier and cheaper for us to handle
Yeah.
than these on and off events that cause us to be here longer and use more material than we would otherwise.
Well, and these quarterly reports just reflect that not every department spends all of their money evenly throughout the
Right.
year. That's all. And the school department is the same,
Right.
same experience.
Yep.
It's just what we, if we were
What we
at
spent
fifth
so far.
December, that's average, on average what it should be, but some may be more, some may be less. Seasonally, depending on what's going on in there.
Excise continues to amaze me, in the supply chain challenges and inflationary costs. It doesn't appear to have stopped people from buying big gas guzzling cars,
Yep.
hypothetically. We thank you for that excise payment, by the way.
It's more than my mortgage, I'm sure.
So budget
Break it down
schedule.
per month. Okay, budget schedule.
So this is the overall master. Kate Bolton and Colette and I coordinate this. This looks at kind of the full 4-month view, start to finish. The budget has a lot of, I think, useful information. So we've coordinated and aligned ourselves very closely on this. For our purposes, for the town side, we have initiated the budget process. Liam and his team will be issuing salary and benefit projections to all departments by February 11th, which in many cases is the largest single piece in their budgets. They're working on all the other stuff as we speak, but that's a really important piece for them to lock in. And then their budgets are due to me about 2 weeks later on February 25th. And then, as this schedule suggests, Jeff and I are scheduled to make a joint budget presentation on March 30th. That would be a special meeting Wednesday. And past councils have not wanted to do first reading that same night. So then we're scheduled for first reading to occur at your first meeting in March, on March 6th. I guess for your purposes, again, the schedule is pretty consistent with what we
April 6th, yeah, I was gonna say.
April 6th, thank you. For the finance committee's purposes, really the month of April, a little bit of early May is kind of the detailed budget review time. And we're suggesting 5 meetings and essentially staying on your Tuesday schedule if that still works, and doing a meeting a week for, again, April and the first week of May. Historically, that seems to have worked out fairly well, and we'll work out the particulars of who appears before you when. There's we've programmed this in, but there's often some fluctuation depending on availability of staff and needs of the finance committee as well. So I'm not looking for approval. I just want to necessarily make you aware of the schedule. And again, it's not materially different from what we've done over the last 3 or 4 years.
I know John asked about over email, but can you just speak about to the audit report as well? Because that is,
Sure.
it typically happens right before budget season, correct?
Pardon?
It typically happens right before budget season?
Yeah, I think it's important for all of us to have that before you entertain and talk about the spending for next year. Let's figure out how we ended last year. Really, the date is embedded in the charter, and that has us providing financial audit by the end of December, by the end of the calendar year. We've historically been very challenged to meet that deadline, and that's a point of some discussion of the Charter Commission, actually, as to whether that's a realistic standard. But at the very least, I would wholeheartedly agree. We all need to have that information before you talk about budget for the following year. So we have had some significant staff changes. I think we're well positioned for the future. This fall has really been a lot of transitional work between outgoing retiring staff and new staff. So we're slightly delayed. We're on track right now to have our piece finished by the end of this month, so in the next 10 days or so. And we're waiting for confirmation from the auditor, but they need at least 2 weeks, if not 3 weeks, to kind of turn their piece around. So realistically, we're looking at mid-late February for the audit, which puts us in good position from a budget point of view in terms of having that. We will schedule a public presentation for him to make that presentation to the Board of Education and the Town Council jointly.
And we're going out for bid after this year, correct?
We actually have gone out to bid. Last Thursday, we received bids. Unfortunately, we only received one.
Okay.
Our current long-term auditors have chosen to get out of the business, essentially. It's not terribly lucrative, and I know this just from talking to our longtime auditor. And his company has made the business decision to seek other sorts of work. I think we sent it out to 7 or 8 different firms, so disappointed to see just one response. So we're not in a position, we haven't really even evaluated it yet. This is a known quantity. I want to do some reference checks. We fully intend to come to you. Perhaps we can do so at your meeting in a couple of weeks with a recommendation around that.
Yep.
My only hesitancy is that we had one firm that we're very interested in that said, timing's not right to respond. We wish you were coming out soliciting in a couple of months from now. So one option might be to go back out, but
Yeah, sure.
I'll be in a position in a couple of weeks to make a firm recommendation in that regard.
So one thing that we did last year, and I can't remember where it falls in the timeline and if we're already behind, I think some of it came out of bowling, but some of it came out of specific finance conversation around establishing, some guidance around the budget as staff and schools were putting it together. And last year it was all about recovery and giving some parameters as people worked on their budget. When are we going to talk about that? I know we have the goaling workshop tomorrow where some of that might come up because our goals last year, we did have some very specific financial goals around the mill rate and around, our decisions around capital investments, where I think we specifically said we weren't going to fund certain investments over 5 million. So I guess when are we going to have that conversation as a committee to guide budget development?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. My answer is I don't know, right? I think tomorrow might be a good indicator. I think it might be worth something specifically you or I to bring up.
I think
Because I know, John, you and I have had conversations about, it's supposed to reflect what we value, right? And a lot of times it's Tom that just presenting a budget, which is completely okay, but do we want a forum that we want to be able to express that there's certain things, like for instance, I'm sure Counselor Johnson, I know there's something with public safety he's gonna want, right? So,
Yeah.
that's within Tom's purview to say yes or no, or present us whatever he thinks is right. But yeah, I think we should have some sort of forum where, what's on the mind and what's our goals. Let's see what happens tomorrow. And then
Okay.
because I don't know the answer to that. I guess
Yeah.
it hadn't even really occurred to me.
Well, I think last year maybe was a special year because of the recovery
Sure,
focus.
yeah.
But I, now that we have the community survey, the one thing I was thinking was like, as staff puts together their budgets, referencing that as a data point to
Okay,
help
yeah, right,
justify,
yeah.
like, make sure you look to the
Oh, yes.
survey to help justify
Certain
any
things,
new
sure.
investments. Like, that's just an example of something that I could see us
Yeah.
as a council discussing, because I know we're going to talk about the survey more tomorrow potentially. And again, I think using that as a mechanism somehow to help formulate budget priorities could help. Like, we know there were 5 areas, like we really want to see what town and school have to say in response to
Yeah.
budget needs in those areas that were specifically called out as opportunities. So again, we don't have to answer that today, but I just think we should have a position and bring that back to Tom and the schools. Because I really liked last year how the schools really framed their budget around those areas, and it just helped connect, what we told them we wanted to see, and they kind of responded directly back. So I thought it was helpful.
Yeah, historically, for what it's worth, that's been done as at the goal setting by the council as a whole. There may have been some input from past finance committees, but that wasn't necessarily a routine that's considered every year. Having said that, I'm sure they'd be receptive to some guidance. And typically those conversations have more to do with kind of tax rate, very specific
Yeah.
targets. I think you're right. Community service is an opportunity to highlight certain areas. And for my part, I have certainly tasked my staff with educating themselves with the survey results and using that as part of their budget discussion and justification as may be appropriate. Keep in mind, I'm tasked with proposing a budget. I hand it to you and it's the council's to do what it will. So if there's something that I'm missing the mark on, that shame on me. But if there is something there, the council is certainly free to modify the budget however it wishes. Hopefully not too much. Yeah.
Is the high school hill graded that way so kids won't slide on it?
I think in part it was.
All right, well, I'm bringing that forward.
Yeah.
Regrading the high school hill. We're bringing sledding back. You think I'm kidding? Watch. No place to sled in this town, except for my own yard. Questions? I'll reach out to the finance chair of the Board of Education and speak with her, because I know just my point of view is, I think the last couple of years have been actually quite smooth with the Board of Education. I think that I know when April and I first got elected, we had a grand experiment of trying to work together a ton. That did not go really well. We tried to govern as a body of 14 and 12 staff. And so I think we've kind of found that sweet middle spot of, hey, let's stay in our lane, but then let's interact in appropriate and productive ways. So I'm just hoping to stick with that. I think Councilor Clucci and Sarah Layton did a great job last year. So I'm going to just try to follow that model and do the same thing.
Yeah, one town, one budget was a wonderful concept. I'm not sure if it worked all that well, just in terms of the elaborate
Right, yeah,
Yeah.
sure, yeah.
process.
And, you know, there have been some changes on the Board of Ed. They have 3 brand new members and a new finance chair. And so I do think that it's important that you reach out and, you know, have that conversation, and you can report back to us what direction they would like
Yep.
to see. I'm certainly not opposed to meeting jointly if they want to discuss goals,
Sure.
but I don't know that that's the direction that,
Sure.
that any of us are headed. So
Do we want to set the date of do you guys want to do that before we adjourn?
Yep.
And it would be a single item agenda.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Do you want to do the audit?
Oh, yes, I'd like to update you on the audit RFP as well. So 2 items.
okay.
Say again, Liam?
2 weeks is the first. Tuesday.
Does that work? Tuesday, February 1?
1 second, my work life has picked up, so let me,
It works for me.
I'd have to go a little later.
Can I ask you a question, April, in terms of starting at 4? Is 4 always a good time, or is 4:30 a better time?
No, we can make 4 o'clock.
Okay.
Carpool wise, thank you.
Because
I
I
can't do
We did a,
4:30
we
from-
did an elaborate car swap in the
Yeah.
parking lot today at Town Hall. I was 30 minutes early for the meeting, so,
I'm not
but
gonna,
thank you for asking.
I can't do 4 on
Okay.
the second. I could do 4:30
Are you checking the first or the second?
first, sorry. 4:30,
4:30 is fine.
Here.
okay.
Good.
4:30 on the 1st?
Okay.
4:30 on the first, and then we're gonna that's gonna be a February meeting, and then
Okay.
we'll resume March.
Perfect.
Okay, with that, we're adjourning. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Paul.
Made the motion.
Oh, I forgot, I can't. Motion to adjourn?
So move.
Second.
All in